In this simulation video, we'll be taking a look at the connection process for the 5.5-inch post to double beam bracket for the Evolution Steel framing product. Before we get started, here's a list of the recommended tools and safety equipment you'll want to have on hand when working with our Evolution Steel framing product. Know that all posts must be temporarily braced until fully stabilized and permanently connected with framing or other structural members. For deck frames, this means that all beams, joists, hangers, and any blocking that shores up the structure should be in place before the bracing can be removed. In short, the deck frame should be fully assembled and secured first before bracing is removed from the assembly. To get started installing the 5.5-inch post to double beam brackets, bring the two clamshells and their post cap pieces over to the post that they'll be attached to. Note that each of the clamshells that make up the bracket are slightly different. One side is the flush mount clamshell, while the other clamshell is the post cover. This is important because the flush mount clamshell is always installed facing outwards, away from the structure, while the post cover clamshell is installed on the back side of the post, and it will face the structure. Another significant difference about this bracket is that it has two post cap pieces, which will be installed one per clamshell. These work together to provide a solid surface under the beam, which means that installing these will meet the code requirements for performing end-to-end beam splicing of the double beam directly over the 5.5-inch post. More on this in a moment. For now, let's get started attaching the clamshell assemblies to the post. Begin by grabbing the post caps and rotating them into each of the clamshell pieces as shown. Next, grab the loose clamshell assemblies, then slide them onto the post, being sure that the flush mount side faces outward and the post cap pieces are fully seated and slid forward. Afterwards, secure the bottom half of the clamshells to the post using Evolution self-tapping screws. Know that each bracket will require having 28 Evolution self-tapping screws on hand at each post, 14 of which will be needed to attach the clamshells to the post, while the other 14 will be used to complete the connection of the bracket to the double beam. Repeat the bracket attachment process at all the posts in this run. Before we continue, let's clarify that this is just a simulation build and that the number of posts needed and their spacing is subject to change for any given deck build. Fortress Building Products offers span and load charts via an online resource center listed here. These charts support a wide variety of build applications. Please reference this material along with any deck schematics or drawings for a particular build. Additionally, be sure to have a structural engineer verify that a build will meet span and load requirements as needed. Now let's continue by adding the first double beam to the assembly. Ensure that the beam is set onto the bracket with any drainage or weep holes facing down. If the double beam track needs to be drilled to allow for additional drainage, do so with a 3/8-inch bit and coat the holes with 3 coats of Evolution touch-up paint. Also, note that the maximum beam overhang allowed for this product is 24 inches past the post. Keep this in mind when both cutting and positioning the beam. In this simulation, this cut-to-length double beam is going to fall directly in the middle of the third post, so this beam will be end-to-end spliced with another beam over this post in a moment. For now, once the beam has been placed and positioned in the brackets, it should be temporarily secured into position using clamps or assistance to help hold it in place. The top of the bracket can now be secured to the beam using 14 Evolution self-tapping screws. Fill all holes possible on each side of the beam, then remove the clamp and add screws to any remaining holes. This process should be repeated at each bracket supporting the clamped beam. Note that if performing an end-to-end splice over the post, that only half the screws can currently be installed. To finish out the splicing connection, the entire process can be repeated to add the next beam in line. Here again, any drainage holes should be facing downwards as the second beam is installed. It should also be positioned so that it butts up against our first beam. Be sure to use clamps during this process as needed, then secure everything in place by using Evolution self-tapping screws to finish out the post-to-beam splicing connection. End-to-end beam splicing is something that can be taken advantage of, specifically with the 5.5-inch post and post-to-beam bracket setup. The post caps that provide support for the beam allow the connection to be code compliant, and at the same time they require no additional hardware. This is because the post caps are secured via the holes in the L-shaped arms that align with the bracket's pre-existing holes, meaning this bracket uses the same amount of screws as our other post-to-beam brackets. So this bracket is optimal for finishing out this deck build or any future deck build where end-to-end double beam splicing is needed. For more information on our steel deck framing products, including where to buy, stop by our website at fortressbp.com/framing. And don't forget to check out our other Evolution steel framing videos as we continue to help our customers steal the show.